Soy the OG Fact Checker, dándoles un delicioso sabor de la historia verificada. Estoy muy emocionado por el hombre que quiero presentarles. No debería decir que se lo voy a presentar porque ya lo conocen. De hecho, es tan famoso que solo tengo que cantar unas pocas palabras de su famosa canción y automáticamente sabrán quién es. No se preocupen, no la voy a cantar. Algunas personas lo ven como el que pone la seriedad con un fuerte acento español que decía docenas de malapropos y nunca reconocía a su esposo disfrazada, pero que podía dirigir una banda y bailar la conga. Otros lo ven como un pionero de la televisión, el cerebro empresarial detrás del talento, un precursor considerado un modelo a seguir por muchos latinos que intentaban entrar en el mundo del espectáculo. Hollywood no fue amable con este pionero y agudo hombre de negocios. Podría haber abandonado su marcado acento, dominado el inglés y asimilado la cultura, pero no lo hizo. Abrazó su herencia latina y nunca olvidó de dónde venía. El mundo adoraba a su famoso esposo, quien a menudo atribuía a su esposo el éxito de la pareja en Hollywood. Pero Desiderio Alberto Arnaz y de Acha, conocido por todo como Desi Arnaz, solía cantar en la sombra. La fuente principal que utilizaré para este episodio es Desi Arnaz, el hombre que inventó la televisión de Todd S. Fordham. La historia de Desi tiene muchos giros, así que la contaré en forma de serie durante las próximas 3 semanas. Esta biografía cuenta la historia de cómo un joven inmigrante cubano sin un peso que no hablaba una palabra de inglés y tenía muy poco talento, logró establecer los estándares para el negocio y la producción de la televisión. Antes de alcanzar el éxito, soportó el racismo y la pobreza y aceptó cualquier trabajo que encontró para sobrevivir mientras vivía con su padre en un almacén infesto de plagas. Incluso aceptó un trabajo limpiando vuelos de canarios en Miami. Por lo que el título de este episodio es El cubano que limpiaba vuelos de Canarias. Desiderio Alberto Arnaz y de Acha, also known as Desi Arnaz, not pronounced Arnaz, not Arnez. Hollywood was too lazy and racist to learn how to properly pronounce this man's last name, was born in March 1917 in Santiago de Cuba, the island's original capital before the shift to Havana thanks to Fidel Castro. Desi was the only child to Desiderio Arnaz y Vega and Dolores de Acha y de Sucias, and he was a descendant of Spanish aristocracy. His great-grandmother, Dolores Vera y Portes, was exiled from Seville by Napoleon's older brother to Cuba, where the family either bought land or it was granted to them near Santiago, where they built a large villa. The family also had a summer home on a small island, Cayo Smith, or El Cayo. Now, I'm going to cut away from Desi's story for a little bit to talk about his paternal family line, because Cuba plays a central role in his history. This family was easier to trace than Charles Adams's family. Purdam's biography doesn't mention this part of the family tree, which also has roots in California, but not in Hollywood. Dolores, his great-grandmother, married a man named Manuel Arnaz y Cobreses from Cantabria, Spain, located in the northern Basque region. The name Arnaz is Basque in origin. Manuel would be later appointed mayor of Santiago de Cuba by Queen Isabella II of Spain. Manuel had a brother, José Arnaz y Cobreses, who left Spain for Havana, Cuba, when he was 16 years old to study medicine while working as a clerk there for 3 years before migrating and settling in Los Angeles, California. Jose, who had 18 children, was described as a traveler, merchant, medic, county supervisor, judge, supervisor of schools, druggist, banker, miller, tanner, farmer, vintner, and cattle rancher. He made serious money moves in California, so serious he would assume the unofficial title of Don Jose de Arnaz from buying up ranches in Ventura County that were freed up after the Mexican-American War, as well as a mission, San Buenaventura Rancho. His purchase and ownership of the mission, which he was originally renting, came into question and was eventually deemed illegal. The Catholic Church petitioned the government to get the mission back, and they were successful through a proclamation from President Abraham Lincoln after California was admitted into the Union. Setting aside this snafu, Jose is credited as the founder of Ventura, California. Desi's great-grandparents, Manuel and Dolores, had one son, Desiderio, the first Desiderio of the family. He was sent to Spain to attend the University of Seville to study medicine and returned to Cuba to open a practice. Desiderio I married Rosa Alberni y Portuondo, who descended from an old Cuban family of nobility. Together, they had 7 children, 2 of them being Desi's father, the second Desiderio in the family, and his brother Manuel. Desiderio II was easily distracted in his teen years and not doing well in school, so he was sent to America for his education, where he struggled to adapt and learn the language. Instead of pursuing a medical degree like his father wanted, he wound up getting a degree in pharmacy and returned to Cuba to open a successful drugstore. He married Desi's mother, another Dolores, known by everyone as Lolita, and considered to be one of the 12 most beautiful women in Latin America. Her father, Alberto de Acha, became the vice president of the Bacardi rum factory before the company went public, and the shares he'd received would set the family up for decades. Fun fact, the bat in the Bacardi logo is a symbol of good fortune in Cuba. Like his father before him, Desiderio II owned and ran 3 farms in the Santiago countryside before deciding to run for the office of the mayor and winning, the youngest person to do so. Known as El Alcalde Modelo, the model mayor, he successfully implemented numerous infrastructure upgrades as promised during his campaign, handing over the reins of his pharmacies to his employees. Being the son of a popular mayor and respected member of the community met high expectations for Desiderio III, and he was groomed to take his father's place. Though Desi was in an affluent family, he worked his father's farms, performing chores as a child and young adult and riding horses to herd cattle, among other things. Music was everywhere, and he took a few private lessons in guitar. Desi couldn't read music, but he showed musicality. By the age of 12, Desi proved to be a chip off the old block and was just as relentless as his father had been. Once he discovered girls and was taken to his first brothel by his uncle at 15, Desi was girl crazy, and in the car given to him by his father when he was a teenager, you could find him with as many girls as he could fit in it. Desi was living his best life, but his education at the school that Fidel Castro would later attend a decade later began to suffer as a result. It's safe to say the men in Desi's family constantly sent mixed signals as it pertained to the treatment of women. Wives were treated with respect and should never be disgraced by unseemly behavior, but they were also treated as second class citizens. For them to take a lover outside of the marriage was an absolute no no. Yet the men took mistresses, even setting up second families that everyone knew about. Well, everyone except the wife, so they say. Desi's grandfather had many children outside of his marriage with a mistress he set up on one of his farms. Desi's father had numerous affairs outside of his marriage. In his unpublished biography, Desi expressed frustration at the mixed signals and couldn't understand how his mother practically worshipped his father, who was distant from his family and known as a cheater by Desi. When he asked his mother why she treated her husband like a king, she responded, "That's the only way I can be a queen." Desi's father's rise to power as mayor occurred during the reign of President Geraldo Machado in the 1920s, who was initially respected as a general during the Cuban War of Independence to oppose American interference on the island. He was responsible for the National Highway and the Hotel Nacional in Havana. Machado's campaign promises were that he would only serve one term and he would fight to nullify the Platt Amendment. This amendment was a treaty between the U.S. and Cuba that attempted to protect Cuba's independence from foreign intervention. It permitted extensive U.S. involvement in Cuban international and domestic affairs for the enforcement of Cuban independence. But here's the deal. Cuba was doing well with America, selling the U.S. sugar, being a tourist destination for Americans, and welcoming American investors on the island. So Machado's upright spine was beginning to bend regarding his promise to quash the Plath Amendment. He also reneged on his promise to only serve one term. With President Calvin Coolidge's unofficial support, Machado ran for a second term, winning unopposed. But when the stock market crashed in 1929, affecting the island's economy, Machado became brutal to protect American interests. He swiftly and viciously dealt with unrest with the labor unions and assassinated his political opponents. Unfortunately, Desi's father began his own campaign of suppression in Santiago, banning any African derived line dances like the conga. This act was essentially an attempt to suppress the island's African roots. The dance and the drum originated from the Congo and Calabar regions and was created by African slaves to celebrate the end of sugarcane harvest season in the 17th century. In the words of the alcalde Modelo, between lubricious contortions and brutal movements, they disrespect society, offend the morals, cause a bad opinion of our customs, lower us in the eyes of the foreigners, and, most gravely, contaminate, by example, the minors of school age who are carried away by the heat of the display, and whom I have seen painted and sweaty, engaging in frenetic competitions of bodily flexibility in those shameful, wanton tournaments. Desi's father wasn't the only one doing his part for the Machado regime. His brother Manuel was the city's police chief. Journalist Patrick Sims, who has written extensively about Cuba, viewed this edict by Desi's father as a direct response to the race dynamics on the island and in the city. Sims wrote, "It was the blackest city in the blackest region, the Afro-Cuba metropolis par excellence. But Santiago was still ruled by whites, who preferred to think of Santiago as a city with easy or warm relations between the races. That was only because blacks knew their separate place and kept to it. Country clubs, restaurants, and schools, including the Colegio de Dolores, were all segregated, and in such elite institutions, white was the only color that counted. Oddly enough, Desi didn't mention his father's actions in his unpublished biography, but he does recall with great fondness the revelry and frenzy around those conga parades and its effect on the people who tried their best to resist the rhythm and beat of the conga drums, which by then included migrant influences from Jamaica, Haiti, and other parts of the Caribbean, as well as migrants from China whose contribution was the corneta china, the Chinese trumpet, better known as the suona. But he did acknowledge the brutality of Machado's presidency and some of its well known players. The year 1933 changed the fortunes of the Arnaz family dramatically. Machado's government was falling apart. People were starving, while his grip on power grew more oppressive to the point that the U.S. ambassador on the island told him to hit the bricks. When Machado fled to the Bahamas, the island descended into bedlam. Santiago turned on the Arnaz family, and a 16-year-old Desi and his mother fled to a relative's house as the residents looted and destroyed Desi's main home, his father's farms, and their summer home on Cayo Smith. Desi's father was arrested in August 1933, and he was in jail for 5 months until Desi's maternal uncle, a lawyer, successfully argued for his release, mostly because they had no crime to charge him with. Advised by Machado's replacement, the future dictator Fulgencio Batista, to leave the island for Miami until things calmed down, Desi's father left the island and his family behind without a dime to his name. By the following year, Desi's father had scraped up enough money to bring his 17-year-old son to Key West, Florida, before the pair traveled to Miami to stay in a rooming house temporarily. His father wasted no time in getting his son acclimated to America, starting with the language. His advice to his son was it would be a while for his ears to get used to it and for his tongue to handle it. But according to Desi, he joked, "My ears eventually got used to it pretty well, but my tongue has been fighting a losing battle ever since." Desi's father joined other Cuban exiles to start a Mexican tile business, the Pan American Importing and Exporting Company, which rented a small building with a warehouse in the rear that had a toilet and sink. Desi suggested they partition a part of the warehouse to live in to save money. At first, Desi's father refused, but eventually he agreed. Desi would muse years later, "I would get home from a date and find my dad, who had been the king of my hometown for 10 years, a good-looking, still young, wonderful guy, going around with a baseball bat trying to kill the rats before we could safely go to bed."